Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission de notre format Super Friends. C'est dans cette émission qu'on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. On se retrouve pour une nouvelle émission enregistrée en plein salon Facts dans la ville de Gand en Belgique et on aura le plaisir d'accueillir dans cette pastille audio l'immense David Petersen, créateur de la série Mouse Garde ou les Légendes de la Garde en français. Donc on va pouvoir lui parler de tout son travail sur cette série qui est en train de reprendre du poil de la bête, si je puis me permettre cette expression. Donc, des souris et pas des hommes, c'est tout de suite avec David Petersen en anglais après le générique. So that was my short introduction in French. Hello, David Petersen. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine, but we're not here to talk about me because people always have my voice in their ears, but not yours. So I'm really glad to have you here in our podcast. And for the people who might not know who you are, how would you briefly introduce yourself to those people?
I'm David Petersen. I'm the creator, writer, artist of a book series called Mouse Garde. In France, I believe it's published under the title Légendes
de la Garde.
De la Garde.
Yeah, that's Gallimard.
Yes.
I think so. And I always start with the very basic questions, but before you were an artist and a comic book writer and artist, were you also a comic book reader? How did comics come into your life?
My sisters collected Archie comics. My sisters are 8 and 9 years older than me. So they collected Archie comics when they were younger, and at some point I discovered them and read a little bit of those. But it was, and I'm not sure which came first into my life, but it was either an issue of X-Men that was in the U.S. in the 80s or late 70s. They were reprinting earlier X-Men's as classic X-Men.
Yeah, before
80. I guess it was in the 80s. It was with Arthur Adams covers.
Yeah, I think it was before the new X-Men from not the new X-Men, but the giant size X-Men from.
It was it was the giant size team, but then in the reprints had covers by Arthur Adams.
Okay.
So yeah, one of those issues somehow, I don't remember if a friend left it at my house or we traded a rubber bouncy ball for a comic or something, but somehow I ended up with that. And then around the same time, Eastman and Laird's Ninja Turtles, specifically the publisher in the U.S. is called First Publishing, which gets confusing because it sounds like I'm saying it was a first printing and not the first printing, but the edition that was published by First Publishing. Which was the first time that the Turtles were in color.
Oh, okay. So you hadn't read the black and white original version?
No. I mean, it's the exact same material. Yeah. It's just in color.
And so, are those comic books the one that made you wanting to be an artist afterwards, or did that came later?
Specifically, Ninja. I mean, I think in terms of wanting to be an artist, I think every child likes drawing and is an artist. And at some point...
I never drew anything.
You did at some point. I mean, if you go into a kindergarten classroom and ask all the kids, do you like to draw? All the hands go up.
Yeah.
When you get into first grade, maybe 1 or 2 hands don't go up. You keep going up, getting with older and older children, fewer and fewer hands go up. So it's not that I discovered I wanted to be an artist. It's that I just never stopped drawing. My hand never went down. I always liked drawing.
That's a very beautiful way to say it.
Yeah. It's not when did I start, it's when that I didn't stop.
Yeah. But you had also to think that at some point, even if you loved to draw, there's something different between loving to draw and having that as a professional work.
So Ninja Turtles specifically put me in the mindset of making my own comics. And that was because right on the cover, above the title of the comic, it said Eastman and Laird's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And when you read those early issues, there's something just different and playful about them, where even as a 11, 12-year-old kid, I went, these are two guys making this stuff up and drawing it. Even though I was reading the X-Men stuff and I could look at the credits of who had drawn the reprint cover of Arthur Adams, and maybe this was a Dave Cockrum issue or a John Byrne issue, and it was written by Chris Claremont. I could see all those credits. It still felt like it had gotten cranked out of a machine in some way. That it was part of, obviously with Marvel, it's part of something larger. And I know that those guys were also creating those comics, but there was something about Eastman and Laird's Turtles that just I could see the man behind the curtain. There wasn't an apology for letting us see the thumbprints that they had worked on this. They had fun. They had passed these pages back and forth and told a weird story. So that was this is a job. I'd like to have that job.
And what it hold? Did you do a specific art classes, or did you just draw by yourself and at some point try to be published?
In the U.S., I'm probably one of the last generations that had art classes all year round in public education.
Oh, okay. Not in the private art school?
Not private, no.
Okay.
No, just regular public school that any child can go to. There were art classes available all year round from the time I was in kindergarten all the way up through my senior year of high school. After that, unfortunately, with the American education system, they started cutting funding for the arts. And so fewer and fewer classes were available. But I had it all the way through. And then my parents noticed that I was interested and they were supportive. So they did find... at an art institute, a museum that had some classes for kids. And I got to take some of those. I don't know that they were particularly educational in terms of, did I learn anything? Maybe a little. I think what it really was just permission. It was permission from my parents. It was permission in terms of time. Here's a window of time that's just set aside. You just get to draw. And I was then surrounded by other people who also liked that, who were into that. And we could talk with each other. We could show each other our work. And then I met a group of friends, actually through public education, that were into the same thing. We'd sit together in art class, or we'd meet after school. We'd come up with our own comic book characters, our own stories. And it's just being given that permission that I think made the big difference.
And is it because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was one of your favorite comic book that you wanted also to do a comic book with animal characters, or is it unrelated?
I've loved lots of talking animal stories. So Wind in the Willows, Aesop's Fables, the Disney Robin Hood, the classic animated version. Winnie the Pooh. Lots of things like that. I've always loved how what animal the character is also informs you of the personality of the character in some way. I love talking animal stories, but I also found that I could draw the turtles when I was in high school and even younger. I could draw the turtles fairly well. And when I tried to draw X-Men characters or other superheroes or any human that's supposed to look in any way attractive or not hideous, not ugly, I really struggled. It was really hard. I could kind of copy other artists' drawings. If I was copying that specific drawing, I could replicate it. But then to just draw that same character but without looking at anything, they'd turn out not looking very human, especially in their face. And so I was just always better at drawing animals and creatures and monsters than I ever was drawing people.
So can you tell me about the origins of Mouse Guard? was it the first project you had in mind when it came to create a story and a universe, or were there something before that?
So like I said, I had a group of friends, and we all created all kinds of stuff in high school. We had, and a lot of them were homages to things. Some of them were homages to the Ninja Turtles, about, like mutant animals that had to keep hidden. We had things that were, more like anime, space, sci-fi, like Robotech or Macross. We had superhero characters. We had all sorts of things. And one of the things that I created during that time was very much an homage to Disney's Robin Hood. It was talking animal characters in a medieval setting. And as I got out of high school, I thought about looking at that again and trying to not make it as derivative of Robin Hood. And then it was that kind of body shape. It was more humanoid, proportioned bodies, but with animal heads and hands and tails. And then in college, I dusted the idea off and said, I think I want to try this again, not make it as derivative and make it more interesting. And then that one, I took the Aesop's Fable approach. Let's make them more like real animals. Let's have all sorts of species, and then I'm going to try to treat the species like Tolkien treats different races. So the group of foxes would all have a culture and an architectural style, or a clothing style, or whatever it is that they wear to adorn themselves, or anything like that. That would be specific to foxes. And then I'd do the same for hares or rabbits, and then I do the same for mice, and I do the same for geese, and I do the same for, and it got very overwhelming, as you can see. It's not just the races of elves and dwarves and men and hobbits. It was every species of animal I would need to come up with a whole culture for. And then the other issue was wondering, how am I going to keep something as small as, say, a mouse involved in the story? Because if I keep the predator-prey relationships accurate, it's kind of like when the hobbits come out of the Shire, except where the other races go, oh, little hobbit, you're so little, you can't affect any change in the world. Except in an Animal Kingdom version, the other species would also say, yum, lunch is served. So it's like, how do you keep mouse characters involved in a story? And I just started working on their culture first. And how would they make sure that even if a predator got into one of their cities and wiped out that city, it doesn't wipe out the entire population? Oh, they have lots of little cities, and they're spread apart and they're hidden. Oh, wait, how are they going to get from one city to another? Well, there's this group that's called the Mouse Guard that gets them between the cities, and it's kind of like playing a ranger in Dungeons and Dragons. It's about knowing pathways and hidey holes, and knowing the direction of the wind, and being able to sense a predator because of smell or sound or something like that. And once I started down that path of developing the Mouse Guard, the characters themselves, I just went, this is where the story is. Once you care about the plight of a mouse doing this, why do you care about the fox? The fox isn't sympathetic anymore. The fox's story isn't as interesting. So I just decided to push all the rest of it to the background, make all of those essentially threats and predators to the mice, and let's just focus on mouse culture.
And that's why also, I think you already said in the interview that you didn't develop the languages of the other animals, because even they could speak between them, we don't see them actually speak, because we are just following the point of view of the mice. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I've had people ask, why are mice the only ones that are intelligent in your books? And it's not that they're the only ones that are intelligent. The other animals all speak their own languages to each other. The further, if you think about like the phylum, genus, class, species, kind of zoological categorization, the further away you get from a mouse, the harder it is for a mouse to understand that language. So you deal with some slightly larger mammals to them, and it sounds like it's an accent. But if you keep going, or if you get into things like birds or snakes, it's all just sounds. None of it makes sense even as language to them.
Yeah, which is quite logical. It follows something logical. But I was also wondering, when you designed all the characters, because when you're drawing human characters, it's quite easy to differentiate them with, I don't know, their hair, their nose, and stuff like that. I assume that with mice it might be a little bit more different, or I'm just too I'm just too anthropomorphic in my point of view. But how did you design the very differences that would make, like, okay, so this mice I recognize from the others?
In the beginning, it was about personalities and playing off of personalities that I know, because I think it's always interesting to have characters that are on the same side. They both have the same goal, but they have very different ways of wanting to reach that goal in a way that can make them butt heads. And I knew characters like those between myself and my friends, either in real life when we're going to go do something, and we all know we want to have fun this afternoon, but we have very different ideas of what that's going to actually be. Or if we sat down and played a role-playing game. And, my thief character might have a very different opinion about how we get into the castle than the ranger or the cleric or the bard. And so I was basing the original characters on myself and my friends, and kind of these exaggerated versions of ourselves. And then because of that, there also was a language to designing the characters visually. The character of Saxon is based on some of my worst traits. He's angry. He's quick to temper. He's very rash. He leaps before he looks. And so he's a little smaller. He's a little shorter. He's got a little bit of the Napoleon complex idea. And Saxon's a little smaller. He's got kind of that Napoleon complex idea. He's trying to compensate for something of being small. He lashes out. Kenzie is based on my best friend, who's very tall, very lean. He has this almost regal presence, and he's very calm. So his fur color is gray. There's nothing dramatic about his fur color. It doesn't rock the boat. His cloak is blue, calming. When I drew his cloak, I always try to have it going very vertical. It just kind of drapes nicely. Saxon's cloak is always billowing out behind him. It's always in action. He's always doing something enough to make the cloak move. Saxon's weapon is a sword. It's very aggressive. Kenzie's weapon is a staff. It's more thoughtful. Looks like a wizard.
And what because one of the main elements that we have in the whole Mouse Guard series is the famous black axe that we're following through generation and generation of Mouse Guardians. Was it an idea that was present at the beginning of your story, or did it come
It was
later?
a little while later, but I started coming up with a character that was kind of two inspiration points. One was a friend of mine in college who tended to play dwarves in D&D, kind of grumpy dwarves. And he never liked when I drew his character because he said I always drew his character like it was an old man. Like, my character's not that old. Why are you drawing him like he's that old? So I thought, I'm going to make a kind of grumpy dwarf, angry old grumpy dwarf character. But then the other thing I thought of combining it with was the idea of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that I wanted a character who, when we know him, when he's portrayed by Alec Guinness in the original trilogy, even though he's an old man and he's, powerful and capable, he can fight Vader. He can still play Jedi mind tricks. He's still a formidable opponent. Yeah. But we realized that when he was younger, when he was in his prime, he was even more amazing. He was even more capable. And I just thought, I want a character like that. I want an old character who's still amazing and respected, but that we know has a history of being a war hero from long ago, and how amazing must he have been when he was young. And so that's where the character of Kellinaw came from. And I just thought the way to do that, to make him, to kind of surround him in this legend, is that he's not even known as Kellinaw. He's not even known as his name. He's known as the Black Axe, which is this weapon that he carries. And yeah, I actually stole the design for the axe from Mike Mignola.
Does he know?
I think I've told him. I don't remember if he just rolled his eyes or, yeah. I tend not to bring it up around him anymore because it was early on when I told him, and I don't know that I want to tell him again. Don't listen to this, Mike.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's listening to this to this podcast. And the thing is, like, in France, we don't have all the anthology series, so I haven't read all the Mouse Guard series, so maybe I'm mistaken. But from what I've read so far, so we've got mice and all their natural predators. We've got snakes, owls, weasels, but there's no cats.
That's correct.
Why would you do a series about mice with no cats in it at all?
It's because I wanted this to feel like a world without humans. From a storytelling point of view, one, I didn't want there to be litter. That's part of what they're using to build their civilization. I didn't want there to be bottle caps and matchboxes and rubber bands that they're incorporating into, that's how they build crossbows or, wheels or gears or things like that. I didn't want there to be human debris. I also didn't want there to be the kind of deus ex machina, trope where at any point, essentially the hand of God can come in that's a human, or whether it's a foot accidentally stomping on the the baddie, or a hunter shooting the fox that's the predator. I wanted it to be a world without humans. I just wanted the mice to be essentially on their own. There's nothing that's coming to save them. And so when you get rid of humans, you have to also get rid of things that imply domestication. So
therefore,
no cats, no rats, actually. And even though rats aren't necessarily domesticated, you see a rat and you think of a city, whether it's a medieval city or New York or, some other populated, center in modern times. But I don't want to even put that in the mind of the reader. I want it to feel like it's folklore.
Mm-hmm. Were there a specific choice to have your books done on squared pages? Because and what were the implications in terms of storytelling for you? Because you have less space and you don't have maybe the same pacing or the same number of panels on the page. So
the square format came about from my local comic convention back when I was in high school, before I had even done a comic. The local comic convention was big on having mini comics. There were lots of artists there with mini comics, which, for those who don't know, is a traditional sheet of paper folded in half, and you do enough of those and you staple them together, you have a little booklet. And it produces something very similar to a standard comic book size, but smaller. What I was worried about was if I ever went to that convention, if I ever decided to draw a comic and have it printed as a mini comic, I can't afford to have a banner or any other kind of thing to get people to come to my table. How are they going to, walking down the middle of the aisle, know to come over and look at my little rectangle of a comic versus every other little rectangle on every other table? And I was trying to come up with ways that would make it visually stand apart without increasing any cost, because that's one of the things about mini comics. They're very cheap. You use a photocopier. And I don't know what size this would be in France, but in the US, we call it legal sized paper. Okay. 8.5 wide by 14 long. And when you fold that in half, you get something that's a little more square. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I played around a little with the, putting panels in that format. And I liked that when you do a horizontal establishing shot, if you do that on a traditional comic sized page, it's very small. If you want to do kind of a big panorama image, it's very small and it feels like you lose all your impact. And I wanted to have establishing shots feel like the big panoramic images from a David Lean movie, like Dr. Zhivago or Lawrence of Arabia. And on that wider format, those panels have a lot more impact. They mean something. So fast forward to when I actually start Mouse Guard, I decide I don't want to have to do more math than I need to. So I thought if I make the height and width of the comic the same, when it comes to figuring out the reduction, if I draw larger and I have to shrink it down, I only have to do math in one direction, or with not one number now.
Did you have to study the animal biology to render all your characters, especially thinking about the fights with bigger animals like owls and snakes? Because I wouldn't know how to draw how a snake moves around a mice, for example. And I don't know if you maybe watched documentaries or stuff like that.
A little bit. It's less about watching documentaries and more just looking at photographic reference.
Yeah.
With the mice, I didn't so much because I have to have the mice in my comics do things that real mice tend not to do, which is like stand on their hind legs. Or if they're holding something, I mean, even though we know mice don't stand on their hind legs and wield a sword, I have to.
Do we?
I have to draw it so that also the balance looks correct. You believe that they could stand up and be holding something in their arms. So the mouse anatomy is very much kind of cheated so that I could just draw it. I looked at a little bit of reference and then just started drawing mice in a way that felt comfortable, that I knew I could get them to do all the action poses that I need them to do. But yes, you're right. When they face off against a predator, I also want that to feel as real and dangerous as it can to the reader. So I look at lots of photo reference of different animals. Nowadays, I am able to sometimes find a 3D model of some of them where I can rotate them around. But yeah, it's always a balance though, because you can't be a slave to the reference. You have to still draw it and make it interesting. And inevitably, you're going to also have to draw it either from an angle that you're never going to find reference for, or you're going to have to draw it doing something that the real animal could never actually do in terms of their poses or a balance issue or something like that. You fudge it as best you can.
There's been quite some time since you didn't write and draw a whole Mouse Guard series. Is there something? Is it something that you still plan to do? And can you explain us what you have been up to lately?
Yeah, I'm actually working on the next Mouse Guard book now, but it has been that I'm writing and drawing. But it has been a long time. The plan was to get going into what would be the 4th volume of the main series. But we put out a short story collection, and then we thought it would be fun to do some anthologies with other artists. And around the time it was getting to the point where it was embarrassing that I didn't have a new book. My mom, who had Parkinson's and was living alone, got to the point where she really couldn't and shouldn't be living alone. And we moved her closer to me, and very shortly after, she had a head injury during a fall, and she couldn't stay there at that facility anymore. So she ended up living with us, and I became her full-time caregiver. And so for about 3 years, my wife and I really, we didn't have time to take a shower without making sure somebody was there watching her. And it completely killed any time I had to work on the book. She passed in 2020. And I was like, okay, now I can get back to work. And then the pandemic hit. And that also affected income. It was harder for book sales, and conventions are a part of my. I was still doing, even when my mom was still alive, I was still doing some convention appearances. So all during the pandemic, instead of getting work on the next book done, I was kind of rethinking how my online store works and doing things virtually and remotely, almost doing convention appearances virtually on a Twitch channel. So yeah, now that we're all on the other side of that, I'm finally getting back to work. It's going real slow because I'm way out of practice.
Yeah.
Writing and drawing my own stuff.
And ouais, je te fais dernière question, ça va? Merci. And I was just wondering how you came in contact with Gabriel Rodriguez that just signed the latest Black Axe mini-series.
I was a huge fan of Lock and Key, and I was introduced to Gabe through some other creators, some mutual creator friends. And yeah, we hit off a friendship, and I think it's been about 10 years we've talked to each other about that it would be fun to work on something together. We kind of batted some ideas around, and the reason he ended up doing a Mouse Guard story was I wanted to get a Mouse Guard book out that would allow me to keep working on the next volume. Yeah. And we had done, even though we had done some anthology Mouse Guard books with other artists, those artists wrote those stories, and they were supposed to be tall tales and legends. And I thought, this time I want to do something that's a little longer of a story instead of a 6-page story or a 4-page story. I want to do something that's about 3 issues long, and I want to write it so that it's true to the history of Mouse Guard. It's a canon story. And then yeah, Gabe drew that. Unfortunately, he also insisted that I be the colorist on it, and so it completely negated. It negated any of the time that I was going to use to work on Weasel War. But yeah, I'm back to work. I was working on pages just before getting on the flight to come to this convention.
All right, and the goal also, I think, is to do also backstories on the other 9 bearers of the Black Axe.
I would love to. We'll wait and see how the sales are on this book and how the publisher feels about moving forward. That's a lot of books to commit to, obviously. But yeah, I would love to do more Wielders of the Black Axe.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, David.
Thank you.